Okay, by my clock, and by that clock on the wall, it is 11 o'clock, so we will get started. First of all, I think if all of you who had questions have asked them. I did make one change. I am going to try to finish chapter 27 before the test. So we have two classes, today's class and Tuesday's class. The test is Thursday, as is on the syllabus, but the chaptering is different, and again, that's due to the way I made up the old test. So anyway, and well, two of you have already turned in your papers. All told, three of you have turned them in early. The papers are due tonight. I have not checked since about 8 o'clock last night, but I'll check again probably. I might check when I get home, or I might check in the morning. It's supposed to rain this afternoon. I hope it does. That way I would have an excuse to stay inside and not in the yard. But that's something else. That's another topic entirely. Anyway, you will need, you'll need two Scantrons, because I'm giving what used to be two separate tests. The one test is chapters 21, 22, and 23. The other test is chapters 24, 25, 26, and 27. So you need two Scantrons. I have Scantron. I have an answer key that uses Scantron. All right. And yours has been taken care of. Okay, you didn't know that. All right. Let's see. When I ended with the Battle of Britain. Actually, no, I ended with Germany invading the Soviet Union. And now, one reason that Hitler thought he'd have an easy time of it was 4,000 miles away, Stalin had his army preparing to fight Japan, all the way across Siberia. Now, the Soviet Union has had for a long time a two-way railroad going all the way across to the Pacific Ocean, and it's a long one. But he had his troops over in close to Japan, getting ready to fight Japan. Well, Stalin had to immediately. Stalin believed Hitler. He believed that he and Hitler were alike, and that Hitler he could trust Hitler. But anyway, Stalin had to move his troops the 4,000 miles all the way across Siberia to get them to the front. And Russia's losses were very, very heavy, to say the least, and they have not fully recovered to this day. They particularly, I say, aren't all World War II veterans dead? Mostly. But then the children they should have had, they didn't get to have because then they were killed on the battlefield. So the Soviet Union has had a gap every generation when those men who died would have fathered the children they did not get to have. Yes?
Speaking of that, isn't it true that, like, if you ask anyone in Russia if they've fought in World War II, a lot of them will say, like, yeah, my grandfather did, or, something of that nature, like 2/3 of the population.
They even had their women fight.
Yeah.
They took men who were not able-bodied. They took men who were too old. Yes, they took anyone they could get, and they lost them like crazy. And again, repeat certain books. But that's, some people believe that Germany actually used the atomic bomb, which supposedly has not yet been invented. Now, something I only learned in the last few years, but then I keep hearing it since then. Hitler believed that he could persuade the United States and Great Britain and France to join with him to fight the Soviet Union. And ironically, it did happen. The United States and France and Britain and Germany did join up to fight the Soviet Union. Well, not really, to fight the Cold War, but they did not actually exchange gunfire. But the United States ganged up on the Soviet Union, because the United States and its allies. But Hitler did not live to see it. Some terms I think you ought to know, because you'll see, if you study World War II, you'll see these terms. This is Luftwaffe. This is the name given to the German Air Force.
You say that again?
Luftwaffe, Luftwaffe. It's a German word. It's a name given to the German Air Force. Blitzkrieg, that means lightning war. In other words, hit them fast and hit them hard. And lightning war. Strike first with airplanes, bombs, then follow up with tanks, and then follow up with your ground troops. Blitzkrieg. Panzer, that's a German word for tank division, the Panzers. The Wehrmacht, these were the ground troops, otherwise known as the war machine. So they had three levels, the air, the tanks, and the foot soldiers. Interesting enough, there was a move on to do away with foot soldiers, but one of our generals said, no, we always have to have our foot soldiers. Today we call it boots on the ground or troops on the ground. And we try to avoid.
Panzer is tanks.
Panzers, tanks, yeah, the Panzers. Yeah. Yes, fighting machine, Wehrmacht, fighting machine, or war machine. These are some words that you'll see. I'm just curious now, how many of you, I mean, my father-in-law was a soldier in World War II and actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge. How many of you knew, I mean, a lot of World War II vets are passed on, but how many of you knew a World War II person? Okay, almost every hand over.
One of mine.
My father-in-law, he's gone now. World War II veterans are dying all over the world, both sides, faster now than they did during the war itself.
Aren't there only like a small handful left?
Only a small handful left, and they were mostly the privates, the young men. The high-level officers, from captain on up, just about all of those are gone. Now, a lot of war veterans live a long, long time, and it's believed that their exposure to the ground and sleeping on the ground, some of them, of course, succumbed to diseases, but the ones that didn't developed immunity to disease that helps them later in life. If you ever have children, yes, let them bake mud pies in the mud, let them play in the dirt. It will actually build up their resistance. I mean, they might get sick, but even that is a good thing in the long run. Some doctors are saying that these days, so not just me. All right. Now, okay, now in the meantime, the United States was staying out of it except to send munitions to both the Soviet Union and to Great Britain. I've mentioned how that the Soviet Union never paid us back. Great Britain made some attempt to pay us back. Well, Roosevelt sat in the White House wishing he could get involved in a war, but the American people let him know, we're not going to fight another war overseas. And Congress passed one bit of neutrality legislation after another that Roosevelt felt compelled to sign because he wanted to be reelected. He knew it was popular. So Roosevelt would sign this neutrality legislation that would guarantee that we would stay out of the war, and that would guarantee that we would never send our troops abroad across the seas to fight a foreign war. All this gave some of the American people a false sense of security, but there were people whispering into Roosevelt's ear, sir, if you want to get involved in a war, you're going to have to get involved through Japan. Hitler knew that we were supplying his enemies with weaponry, but Hitler did not want to fight the United States because the United States was big and strong, and Hitler remembered that the United States had whipped Germany just 20 years before. So Hitler didn't want to fight the United States, but he was drawn in, again, through Japan. Japan, now, there have been many books written about how the United States got involved in World War II, and I've read several of them. You can blame the United States if you want to. The United States did a lot to try to isolate Japan. And some people say this forced Japan to attack us. But Japan went and invaded China, and again the United States secretly supplied armaments to China to help the Chinese fight. The invasion of China was a big mistake. I mean, all right, true, Japan had whipped China to its knees 40-some years before, a generation or two back, but China's population was bigger, and also China was more ready for war, they had fought a civil war between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, the communist and the capitalist fighting each other. So China had some modern weapons, and they were able to fight Japan to a standstill, not actually defeat Japan, but they fought Japan to a standstill. Now Japan took Manchuria first, and held Manchuria to the end of the war when they had to give it up. and sure is in the northeast part of China, which is the closest part of China to Japan. Japan also took Korea. Now, we'll talk more about this later. The Japanese treated the Koreans very, very badly. And to this day, Japan has never apologized for the treatment of the Koreans. They forced their women into prostitution, the young Korean girls into prostitution, particularly supposedly the prostitution to benefit the Japanese soldiers. Well, now the story of Pearl Harbor. Been many a book written about this also. Japan sent 3 ambassadors to Washington to talk peace. All 3 of those men went to their graves insisting that they knew nothing about the fleet that was crossing the Pacific on the way to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and no one has ever proven that they did know. But while they were there talking peace, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and every older American will remember the date. Every December 7th, you'll hear about it. December 7th, 1941. It was on a Sunday. But in Japan, it was on Monday. See, the emperor did not want to attack on Sundays, so in deference to him, they attacked on what was Monday in Japan. And the sun, you know, the international date line is near the border of Japan. So it was Monday in Japan, but Sunday elsewhere. I've talked to older people. My mother said that they went up and went to church unaware, and they got home from church and got the news Pearl Harbor has been attacked, been bombed, and they knew that this meant war. I mean, they had radios back then, and they turned on the radios, and that was all that was talked about. Japan has invaded Pearl Harbor. Some 2,000 American servicemen who had died. Now, here's one of the catch-22s of American history. Did Franklin Delano Roosevelt know that Pearl Harbor was being attacked before it happened? There have been a lot of persons who claimed or who think that he did. Your history books, every history book I've seen always says, no, he didn't. He was too good a man for that. Why would he allow the Japanese to attack simply because he knew that Great Britain could not defeat Germany alone? He wanted to get us involved where he knew that the only way that Germany could be stopped, we waited too long to stop Hitler. We should have tried to stop him before we did. We waited too long. We gave Hitler too much. But he knew that the only way that Germany could be stopped was for the United States to get involved with its own troops, its own tanks and airplanes. So he wanted to get the United States involved in the war, so he sacrificed 2,000 or so American servicemen. Now this is, I mean, don't quote me on this, we don't know. I'm not saying he did or didn't, but weirdly enough, your book, or I believe this book, will say that Roosevelt did not know about the attack on Pearl Harbor. But then it turns around the next paragraph and says, most fortunately for the United States, 4 of its aircraft carriers were located 200 miles south. Okay, keep in mind, the battleships are already worthless. I mean, having the sinking of the Bismarck was a big German battleship that had been sunk by aircraft carriers. The British had sunk the German Bismarck, yes.
Did you say you were in War?
No, I was born 4 years after the war ended.
Oh, okay. Well, but remember you said you were in the War.
My father-in-law fought in it. My wife's
Did
father.
you say didn't you say you were a soldier too in the war?
I don't know what you're getting at. I mean,
Wait, didn't you
You
say
were talking about the possibility of when Vietnam was going on.
oh yeah, I was not in that
Vietnam
war.
War?
I joined the army after the war ended. I joined after the Vietnam War ended. I joined a few years later.
Okay.
I was older than anybody else in my outfit. I was 30.
Yeah, because I remember you said you were in the Army, so I thought.
I was in the army one time. Yes, and I'm glad I did. Anyway, all right. Anyway, the 4 aircraft carriers had been sent south just a day before, and they were 200 miles to the south. Now, south, why south? Because the Japanese were coming from the northwest. So that meant they didn't want the aircraft carriers to hit to meet the Japanese. And they assumed that Japan would possibly strike the United States next. I mean, go to California. And so they didn't want they basically wanted the aircraft, they were the most important aircraft, out of the way. So they moved them south. Now again, we don't know this. A lot of folk have believed that Roosevelt was willing to sacrifice 2,000 or so servicemen so that we could get involved in a war and he could help his distant cousin. I mean, he and Churchill were distant cousins. He could help Churchill and Great Britain defeat Germany. Well, when the attack was made on December 8th, 1941, the United States declared war on Japan. You may know Roosevelt was a cripple and he'd had polio and he could not walk. But he tried to stand occasionally and all it did was hurt him more. All of his efforts. And he even went to Warm Springs, Georgia, nearby, not too far from south of us, to try to find a cure. He couldn't find one. He never did admit, maybe finally at the end he admitted that he was not going to be able to walk again. But it was a terrible blow to him. But anyway, he tried to stand. That I move that we declare war on the Japanese Empire. I've seen that speech in a movie more than once. Anyway, he got his declaration, and it was almost unanimous. One U.S. representative, a female representative, voted against the war. All other 435 members of the House voted for it. All 96, in those days we only had 96 senators, we had 48 states. All 96 senators voted for war. So the United States got its declaration of war. Hitler here made his other, maybe big mistake. Hitler should have told Japan, hey, now, we didn't know about this, we didn't authorize this. Instead, Hitler and Mussolini declared war on the United States a few days later, and the United States turned around and declared war on them. So now we are involved in a legal war, as legal as war is, against both Germany and Italy. Now, again, in spite of the efforts of the isolationists to keep us out, and yes, Americans were eager for it. Yes?
Just a question about Mussolini. I was doing some research for my paper, and I saw Mussolini, he only lived to be 23 years old. Is that?
No, he lived a lot longer
Okay,
than
that was a different Mussolini. Because I saw that and I was thinking.
No, I don't know who are you.
All right, that was.
But he actually, late in the war, his health went bad.
Okay, that was a completely different.
Yeah, that was something completely different. But
Got it.
he lost a lot of his health. He wanted to retire, and Hitler wouldn't let him.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk more about what actually happened to him later. Now, in the meantime, the war had taken a different turn in Europe. After losing the Battle of Britain and being stopped in the Soviet Union, Hitler then moved to North Africa and he took Egypt. And there was a oil pipeline that ran from Egypt all the way into France and Britain. Well, Hitler took over the pipeline because he recalled how Germany had ran out of fuel during World War I. So Hitler took over the pipeline. So the British then sent an army into North Africa to fight in North Africa. The British general's name was Montgomery. Montgomery. Now, meantime, a man named Dwight David Eisenhower was sent into North Africa. Now, we're going to hear about Eisenhower again. Any of you know anything at all about him? He became president of the United States later. He's the first president. I was born when Truman was president, but he's the first president I remember. And I was surprised to look up in the encyclopedia. There was a picture of General Eisenhower, who looked a little bit younger than the presidents. The picture of the president I was seeing. And I asked him, oh yeah, he was our top general in World War II. Anyway, General Eisenhower was sent to North Africa. Now, the British had already defeated the German General Rommel. I'm going to write that name down. Had defeated him once, but the Germans regrouped and fought again. But when the Germans regrouped, this time they met Eisenhower's army. Now, Churchill and Roosevelt met in the middle of the Atlantic, well, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. And they had more than one meeting in the Atlantic Ocean. But they decided we must defeat Germany first and Japan second. In the meantime, Douglas MacArthur was not informed of this. He didn't realize, he wondered, why am I not getting more troops? Now here's where MacArthur made one of his biggest, I know I'm jumping around. I was in Europe and North Africa. Now I'm going to go to Japan, but then that's the way the war went. We had far-flung fronts, but basically we had two big fronts though. One against Japan and one against Europe, against Germany. Now, MacArthur was sitting in the Philippines, which the United States controlled at the time, and he believed, we heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor, he believed, well, the Japanese are going to next either stop and celebrate their victory and try to negotiate a peace, or they're going to go hit the United States. He was wrong. The Japanese instead went and hit the Philippines and caught MacArthur completely unprepared. The Filipinos got together an army, hastily put together, with a few American troops they had, and they fought, but it was fighting uselessly. President Roosevelt sent a telegram to General MacArthur, leave the Philippines and go to Australia, which MacArthur did. I mean, with all respect to MacArthur, he was told to leave. But as MacArthur left in a PT boat, PT boats were fast, he carried a pistol with him, he carried his wife and son with him, and he said, they'll never take me alive. And he kept that pistol on him all the time. MacArthur fled from the Philippines, giving the famous words, I shall return. He did return all right, after the Marines had been there and made things safe for his return. But all the same, he did return. But that was later. Japan took the Philippines surrendered. Americans were forced to the death march, with which many Americans died, marched from the battlefield to the place where Japan was going to keep them as concentration camps. And the Japanese began to basically win one battle after another. Now, in the meantime, Japanese Americans were put in camps. All of you probably have been given a negative impression of the United States for forcing Japanese to be put in camps. The camps were not, even they were not concentration camps. Meaning the Japanese were not starved to death. And the people around them made sure that they had warm blankets in the wintertime, warm clothing in the wintertime, and made sure that they had food to eat. One book, a history book that this school was used, said it was American food, though not the food that preferred Japanese food. Nevertheless, they were fed. They were given some medical attention. They were allowed to grow their own gardens. This is now looked on as being wrong. But in 1942, when it was done, nobody, we can't find anyone alive back then who disagreed with it. The communist was the communist on our side. Everybody alive, every magazine article, newspaper article you see, it's like Americans just knew that we should round up all Japanese and put them in these camps. At first, the Japanese were living in horse barns, but then they felt like, no, this is too brutal, so they moved them to barracks similar to what our soldiers were using. So they were living, they were warm in the winter time, they were fed, they were clothed, they were housed. I discussed this with some of the older men at Lockheed one time, and they said this was actually necessary because the Japanese were so unpredictable. Now again, if you want to disagree with that, you're welcome to. I've had more than once. I mean, I understand you've been taught, I mean, those of you who know about that this was wrong, this was evil, this was bad. It certainly is not politically correct, but I want to say this. That generation won a war. We have not won a major war from that day to this. Again, folks, war is brutal, war is ugly, war is terrible, war is awful. And you have to break your own rules in order to win. You can't be politically correct and win a war. Anyone, I mean, you know, anyone that wanted to say anything. Again, put in camps. Now, the one thing we could have done, should have done, was compensate the Japanese more once a quicker once the war was over. It took us some 40 years to compensate the Japanese for the losses once the war was over. Yes?
I wanted to make a comment, just based on conversations I've had with my husband, who enjoys history, by the way. His thought process or belief is that a lot of the wars that have taken place, and then based on a comment that I thought I understood you to make, or the inference, is, or alleged that the former president, Roosevelt, could have possibly known in advance
Yeah,
that
Pearl Harbor.
this was gonna happen, right? And allowed it to happen, even though all these people lost their lives, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes my husband's, his thinking is, and it's not that he's some conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but his thought process sometimes is that a lot of times these wars and different things that happen, they're manipulated for other purposes than what the American people are told. Sometimes they'll say, oh, this is happening, this person's invading, or this is happening. But a lot of times it's stuff that's going on behind the scenes that we're doing.
Basically, we provoked the Japanese.
That we're doing
Yeah.
because there's another agenda. So why are we telling people over here, oh, this is this? There's really something else going on behind the scenes that, because like you think about a lot of the wars and different things and the drug trade and this and that and the other, the United States is involved in a bunch of stuff.
Very, very, very.
It's involved in some stuff.
There are a lot of people who would like what you just said. A lot of people, and I mean, there's a saying that's going around, particularly when dealing with the Kennedy family: "Nothing is as it seems." What we're told is one thing, but what actually is, and again, that's why it helps to read all. I have a book at the house. It's What Every American Should Know is the title of it. What Every American Should Know. That it's the same historical facts I've been teaching, but has a slightly different slant, and some of it makes the United States look really, really bad.
I mean, I don't want to leave the United States. I'm grateful to be here, but I'm just saying,
Well,
our heads are buried in the sand oftentimes, and we believe everything is like. Sometimes, you know, we're manipulated to
Yeah.
believe certain things.
And also, in wartime, freedom of the press is curtailed. And some of that is necessary, but it's known now that the Germans, well, the Japanese could have known about an attack if they just read the Chicago Tribune, because the Chicago Tribune once printed something about our war plans that shouldn't have printed, but the Japanese never read it. But anyway, the freedom of the press is curtailed in wartime. We did it, and dissenters are often jailed. Again, the United States did it too. Again, the point I just made, you cannot be politically correct and win a war. Lincoln didn't, neither did Jefferson Davis. Freedom of the press was curtailed, freedom of speech was curtailed, freedom to dissent was curtailed in all of our major wars we won. Then we come to Vietnam and we allowed our students to protest. This encouraged our enemies, and we lost. And today, what I fear about this internment of the Japanese, if we ever had a war, and the people on the other side, whether they be Russians or whatever, or Middle Easterners, were too politically correct to inter them in camps, and they could turn against us, something the Japanese did not do. They could turn against us and destroy us from within, because we're too politically correct to do what really would have to be done. Now, I say that telling you knowing that I'm responsible for what I say, and I'm on the record. And I could get in trouble for saying what I just said. But I feel like it's something, I mean, it could really cost us in the future. And now, all right, why did we turn? All right, when we went to war in 1942, I mean, the war was declared in 1941. We put our first troops, and we could not win a battle for 6 months. We finally lucked it out and won the Battle of Midway, which I'll get to in a minute. Well, and the Battle of Coral Sea, the Japanese called it a victory because we retreated. So it was a victory. Our side retreated. but nevertheless, we stopped the Japanese advance. So that was a tactical victory. All right, anyway, yeah, jumping around in the story a little bit. But now, Japan took the Philippines. Then they proceeded to go from the Philippines to Australia. And at this point, Roosevelt and Churchill decided, now wait a minute, Australia must be held at all costs. Only then did they start giving troops and men and equipment to Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. They didn't at first. Actually, MacArthur was in Australia. But they gave troops, and we met the Japanese to about the Coral Sea.